course, Africa is a very developing arena for investment. So, and obviously the governments have resources and they need input from the private sector, expertise, and they need all the support in terms of the economic growth. There is infrastructure deficit in most of the African countries. And that, yes, can be developed using the public, but the private sector has a great opportunity to step in there to provide both expertise, technical capacity, as well as make their money, because they are not going there for free, but they have money to make, they have businesses to run, but it's a partnership between private and the public. And I think there's growing opportunities for PPP initiatives, handy opportunities in Africa, because the most African countries are realizing that that route is one way to get a synergy and win-win situation between the public, which needs the facilities, the services, as well as the private sector, which is in business and wants to partner with the public to get a return on the investment, and then subsequently deliver a service or a good to the intended user. So the opportunities are great. It's very important, like I said in the earlier submission, that it's bringing out the themes that are talking to the needs on the ground in terms of the African needs for PPP. But for me, as a director of finance working for an institution that's undertaking a very big project to develop a hydropower plant to cost around $5 billion, this conference comes in handy because we are at the time when we are pushing through the feasibility studies, technical, environmental, and financial. So for me as an individual and for my institution, Zambezi River Authority, this conference comes in at the very right time when we're just going to launch into financing or looking for financing, and then for the most likely option to come through, which is that we are going to develop our hydropower project at Batoka using the public-private partnership. And beyond that, we go now into the actual delivery, and it's coming out in the workshop that beyond delivery, there is also now exit strategy, monitoring and evaluation, and all the things that go towards making the projects technically feasible, financially viable, and de-risked, because when you de-risk a project, then you attract finances. And so this PPP conference and the themes are coming in very handy and extremely useful for me personally, for my institution, and indeed for the two countries which my company represents, Zambia and Zimbabwe. It did. And we did have an interaction with most of the type of entities that we would like to have a conversation with as we deploy our project. The EPC contractors, potential EPC contractors came in, potential advisors, technically and financially, and potential parties, because when we deploy the project, we'll have all these people to work with. So the one-on-one meeting that we had was very insightful, and also we had an opportunity also to share our aspirations of the project, but also to learn the experiences of these parties that we interacted with. That said, part of the programs that we did as we deploy a project is what we call market sounding. What we did was we sounded our project to the market being providers of equity and loan financing, the potential construction contractors, and all the parties that we'll be with. So we use that to get a feedback on how they look at our project. So that interaction we had on one-on-one, I found it reflective also of the kind of interactions we had earlier, more or less like a continuation of that. So it was good that we had that space to discuss. So the one-on-one was very good. Of course, we would have loved to have more of it, but time is always a constraint. Yeah. The capacity building initiatives we do have a lot of activities around that. For instance, we just completed 3-session program supported by the African Development Bank, AFDB, where we were being trained on the basics of a PPP program, essentially for the Batoka Gorge project. So this program and training ran all the way to start with the board members, all the entire management, the project management unit, the project steering committee, the utilities that we work with. So it was a cross-section kind of training. And the idea was to position all the players, to capacitate them so that as we go into PPP interactions, they understand, they have a clear thought or clarity in their minds with the different roles that players are assigned with regard to the PPP engagement. So that's, I think, one of the key activity I would flag. But that said, we do have also interactions with PPP units in the 2 countries that we represent our principals. In Zambia, we have a PPP unit sitting under the Ministry of Finance. Also in Zimbabwe, PPP unit. So we do have what I would say on-the-job interactions in terms of capacitating ourselves to understand the provisions in the PPP Acts, because as we deploy the projects, it's going to work in those environments. And that said, really broadly, we do have also lined up PPP programs for the staff that will be deploying the project, which we call the project management unit and the project steering committee, basically the project delivery teams. So we do give PPP training a very high prominence, and we have quite a number of activities lined up in the months to come. This is a very important question. PPP units would need to clarify the policy framework, because especially at country level. So if you have a PPP unit that is deploying PPP policy, it's important to showcase or make clear what policy is in place, because the private sector, they would like to have clear understanding and assurance that there is a policy in place to govern their interactions with the public sector. Remember, it's a partnership, and partnerships must have ground rules. So the policy framework brings in the ground rules, and the clearer the ground rules are, the easier it is to de-risk projects, and therefore people can put money into these. Remember, most of these projects are long-term, and people put in money and only get a return after probably 3 to 5 years. So that de-risking, making them comfortable, the policy framework is important. Second one is capacitating the PPP units. Private sector, yes, is bringing innovation, capacity, everything, but public sector must also have the ability to accommodate or to listen or to interpret that interaction so that they are talking the same language. I think the third one would be the profiling of the PPP units in the structures of governance. PPP units, some of them sit, like in my country, they sit in the Ministry of Finance, also in Zimbabwe, in that. Other countries, they sit in the Ministry of Commerce. Other countries, they sit as standalones. But the key theme is that they should sit in a fairly senior ranking, so that when it comes to policy approvals, that is given enough prominence and doesn't take long, because that puts frustration to the private sector who wants business to run in a dedicated time frame, but approvals can be a problem. And if the PPP unit is graded in a low place in a governance structure, that may be a hindrance. So to cut a long story short, my proposal is that it should be profiled fairly high enough. And I think lastly, it's the capacity of the units themselves. It should be a proper PPP capacitated units from the government side. Continuous development, training is also important to the units. Lastly, PPP units must have, every time they engage into a PPP interaction, after the project has been commissioned, there should be post-commissioning strategy in place so that there is that transfer of knowledge. Because then, especially at implementation stage, when the private sector probably pulls out or reduces their participation, there should be capacitation of the public sector to carry on so that we don't have what we may call white elephant projects or problems after handover. So PPP units should take on board most of those, and I'm glad to say most of them are really queuing up. For instance, attendance of such workshop is one of the capacitation of PPP units. So that would be my encouragement to the PPP units.